Welcome to Care in Action, using data as an advocacy tool. My name is Jenna. I'm the Director of Community and an NEMPN board member. We are so pleased to have you join us for NEMPN's 2025 Museum Workers Advocacy Day, and specifically to take part in this session right now. There we go. In order to be considerate and respectful to everyone attending and presenting today, we ask that all attendees that are joining us remain muted. You're welcome to have your cameras on. If you prefer them off, though, that is totally welcome as well. Do whatever you need to feel good and safe and happy. And as a reminder, this session will be recorded, just this introduction and the presentation itself. We'll end it a little bit earlier so that we can then upload to our NEMPN YouTube channel in the coming weeks to share it with other emerging museum professionals. To that end, we will have designated time to address questions, but you may submit questions at any time throughout the session. To submit to our presenters, you can just enter your question into the chat box. And we also have captions available, which can be found in the meeting's control bar at the lower part of your screen. Should you experience any technical difficulties, please send me or Margaret, who is the NEMPN logo in the top, a message in the chat. We'll try to help you out as best we can. And then one last announcement is that following Museum Workers Advocacy Day, all attendees will receive an email with details and an opportunity potentially to share any feedback. So please be on the look for communications from us. We're always trying to connect you with the resources we have from our programs and events. And without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to our presenters for this session, Care in Action, using data as an advocacy tool. So Liz, Martina, Sierra, we're so happy to have you and can't wait to hear what you all have to share.
Thanks so much, Jenna. We're really happy to be here as well. And I'm going to jump right into it by sharing my screen. Let me just make sure I have everything. Okay. Can you see the presentation? Okay, awesome. Always got to check. Okay, so yes, as Jenna already mentioned, this is Care in Action, using data as an advocacy tool. And the session is intended to give more insight into the data collection and analysis work that we do at museums moving forward, as well as hear from a couple of colleagues of ours in the field who are working in art museums across the country and thinking about how to use data to advocate for themselves and for our fellow cultural workers. So for those of you who are unfamiliar with the work of Museums Moving Forward, or MMF as we call it, we are a nonprofit organization that is really dedicated to understanding and advancing equity within museum workplaces, and specifically to do so within our lifetime. Together, we work with partner museums and staff at all levels across the country and seek to measure and make real change within through our programs that work with cultural workers and for cultural workers, and are grounded in our biannual data study, which I'll be talking more about in a bit. And before we do that, we're going to do a couple of introductions. I'll start with myself. I'm Liz Levine, and I wanted to try kind of a different type of introduction for myself and my career, and really ground it in a couple of essential lenses, because these have been two major things that have influenced both my career decisions and my work at MMF. So the first is through the lens of debt. I graduated from college with student loans, and a few years after graduating, I had considered going to graduate school and ended up not going to school, graduate school, due to the additional debt that I would accrue, and often sought positions in nonprofits in part to qualify for public service loan forgiveness. So without my parents' support through college, however, I likely would not have been able to afford to live in New York on my art nonprofit salaries, and certainly not to continue in the field. The second lens is that of pay, which is obviously a huge part of the conversation around the topic of career advancement, which we're going to be digging into a lot in this presentation. I began my career at a very small arts nonprofit and got my foot in the door, so to speak, as a service member through the AmeriCorps Vista program, where I was paid a yearly stipend of $16,000 to live in New York. And after that year, when they offered me a permanent position in the programs department, and a salary of $32,000, I was like, heck yeah, I'm rich. I doubled my salary. So that really set the bar of what was to expect in the future of my career through art nonprofit work. And then I moved to LA and applied to, I think, exactly 100 jobs. And eventually I compromised on my preferred salary and position, but ended up getting a job as a senior project coordinator at the J. Paul Getty Trust. And it was through that time of my life that I learned through many conversations with coworkers at the Getty just how competitive the museum sector is, and felt really lucky and grateful to have chanced into it. My career experiences catalyzed a deep interest in the structural inequities of art nonprofit work. I eventually ended up leaving the Getty to work as a union organizer at AFSCME Cultural Workers United. And for passion, I took a pay cut. As an organizer, I learned a lot about how workers can use different mechanisms to advocate for better pay. But I, as an organizer, would not have been able to afford to live in LA on my salary without my partner splitting half our rent. So that brings me to today, where I am the head of programs at Museums Moving Forward. And I wanted to share all of this not to discourage anyone from going into a job in the arts. I love my career and I would not trade it for anything else, but I did want to offer some context that I feel like is often missing when I hear like really clean narratives around advancement from those who are further along in their careers. There are risks that I've been able to take, like moving to LA without a job, that others simply can't. And conversely, there are choices that I would have made, like getting a graduate degree, that I couldn't do because of my student loans. So that's a little bit about my story. And now I want to pass it to Sierra to introduce herself.
Liz, I love the transparency. And I have my slide kind of modeled in not as transparent of a way as Liz, but in a way that I think is a little bit more transparent. One thing that I like to promote in my sessions is that I like to ask folks, if I could, I would love to have baseball cards for museum workers. I feel like one, they would get more valuable as we continue to rack up jobs, but two, it's a great way for us to kind of get away with having to go through the same stats every single time we talk about ourselves. So this is my virtual baseball card. I started my museum work in summer 2014. Which means yes, I did over a year, over 10 years on the mythical 10-year hump. And I started my work actually in Toronto, Ontario at the Design Exchange. It was formerly the Canadian Design Museum. It is now just an event space in Toronto, which is another conversation about changing trends in museums and how we are losing many of our cultural spaces. I am from New Jersey, and as I say in every session, no New Jersey slander will stand in this call. We are proud Jersey born over here. I have my bachelor's in fine arts in art history and graphic design from Seton Hall University, and my master's from Bank Street College of Education in museum education. And I've done a number of internships. I have interned at the Design Exchange and consequently also at the Met, where I currently work. I have had several paid internships at Cooper Hewitt, the National Portrait Gallery in the United States, as well as the New York City Museum Educators Roundtable. And my season's coaching is actually me outlining when I have been an internship supervisor. My current role is assistant educator of college and university programs at the Met. Means that I oversee our college and university internship program, as well as our standalone programs throughout the year. But I've been doing internships for some time. I was at Ridgefield, Connecticut at the Aldrich Contemporary Art Museum in 2019. I worked at Poster House in New York City from 2020 to 2022 on their internship program, and now currently lead my own internship program. One thing I will not go into, but I'm always happy to answer offline, is how much I made. My first job, I made about 30,000 coming right out of school, so very low wages, again, in the New York City metro area. And I currently make around $76,000. So again, not making really that much more in New York City, even at a large institution like the Met. So I'm going to pass it on to our colleague, Martina.
Hi, it's great to hear all of your stories. And, it's like you never get that from looking at the CV exactly, the struggles. So I'm sort of going to do the same and give you the kind of the outward facing stats that you see here on the screen, and then I'm going to give you a little bit more detail about the experiences that led me to each one and the behind the scenes, if you will. So I'm a curator and art historian, and this is what my resume looks like. I did my undergraduate degree and then subsequently MA, back to back from the University College London. And then education-wise, I took 7 years to complete a PhD between 2008 and 2015. I worked at the Worcester Art Museum between my MA and doing my PhD at Boston University. And then after the PhD, I've had subsequent employment. My first job out of the doctoral program was at an auction house for a year. And then I've kind of followed a curatorial track. And currently I'm testing out independent curation and sort of nursing museum burnout for a little bit. So it's sort of, because you can see it looks like a straight shot. But at every turn, there's ups and downs of the struggle between personal life and work life. And so you won't see here, for example, when I had my first child in 2013, which I took an unpaid semester off from the PhD program, or the second child that I had in 2018. Again, it was right between finishing up being a curatorial fellow at the Cordova Sculpture Park and Museum and starting the MFA job. And that was pretty much 4 months of, I was on maternity leave, but it was unpaid maternity leave because I was in between jobs. So in all of this career path, there's always a juggle between, what you want to do in your career for self-fulfillment, and then also what you want to achieve in your personal life. Make compromises for your partner in a relationship, and also if you choose to start a family, and how you're going to start a family, and how you're going to create stability for that family whilst pursuing a museum career trajectory. I can also reveal how many unpaid internships that I had. I did 4 between my, while I was doing my undergraduate and MA, and then when I first arrived to Boston in 2008, 2006, sorry. So that was before the wave of paying interns. And so I actually didn't even think to advocate for myself. It was sort of discounted that it was going to be labor that wasn't remunerated or compensated financially. And I can also admit that I have, been employed consistently throughout my career, but I have also been applying for jobs throughout. Not many of them, curatorial fellow, it's a term end date position, as well as the job that I had, at the beginning of my career. And so I will freely say that I've sent out anywhere from 10 to 15 job applications a year to sometimes 40, or, Liz's example of 100, when you're actually looking more aggressively looking for a job. But so even if you have a job, you're pretty much, I think it's pretty normal to be also sending out job applications, which is labor on top of the labor that you're doing of a full-time job. And so I'm, really glad to be here in conversation with all of you. And as to MMF, who is looking at data so expansively, to not just reflect the stats that you get on a CV like this, but also to delve a little bit deeper on the experience and to include comprehensively through numbers, through qualitative and quantitative data, you know, what it is actually like for us to work in this field and how to make it better. So I'm going to pass it back to Liz.
Thanks, Martina, and thanks, Sierra. Happy to have you both here. And jumping right off from where Martina left off, I want to share, we're going to dig into some of this data that we've collected over the last couple of years. But before I do that, I wanted to share just a brief overview of the biannual data study. In 2023, MMF released our first pilot study on workplace equity and organizational culture, which was a first of its kind report that surveyed art museum staff on their experiences in the workplace, and specifically with an equity lens. And the data that we'll be sharing today is focused on art museum workers. That's our kind of current scope, but we've heard from many folks in adjacent industries, other art nonprofits or other types of museums, how they've used this data or are conducting similar studies of their own. And the goal of this study is really to create a field-wide view of the trends and patterns in art museum workplaces, and also to help museums that participate in the study to understand their results within the context of kind of the broader field-wide picture. And we distribute a survey, three different surveys to different people within the museum. So we distribute an all staff survey, an HR survey, and a director survey. In 2022, we had 54 museums participate. The study that we just closed earlier this year, we had 93, and we'll be releasing the field-wide report in this fall. So as you'll see in this data, while all of our experiences are different, you know, Sierra, Martina, and I have all kind of pursued museum work in different ways, and I'm sure all of you too. Like all of our experiences are unique, but we're not alone in them. And data helps us contextualize our personal experiences and our experiences at specific institutions within broader structural contexts. So as we walk through this data, I encourage you to consider, you know, what resonates with your experience, what doesn't, what differs from your experience, and what kinds of questions does this bring up for you? These are all kinds of like initial questions that we ask ourselves as researchers to make sense of data and to help kind of metabolize it and then figure out what to do with it. So I'm going to be sharing I'm going to be zooming into one specific cohort of our data set for the purpose of this presentation. And because it's you know, emerging museum professionals, we're going to focus on entry-level staff. So in the staff survey that folks took, workers were asked to self-identify their seniority within these 5 bands. So you can see it starts at entry-level and up to executive. So many folks here maybe identify in one of those first 2 bands, and you're welcome to check out our data study, which is on our website, to kind of dig into whichever area feels most resonant for you. But we're going to share today 5 big takeaways from our deep dive into the experience of entry-level workers in art museums and what it means. So the first takeaway is that entry-level workers are the most racially diverse cohort of workers that we see in art museums. At the entry level, people of color comprise 28% of entry-level workers, and this is you know, more than any other cohort. And this finding, I think, is particularly important because I've often heard that museums have a pipeline problem when it comes to diversity in their staff. But as you can see in this chart, it's really not so much a pipeline problem as it is a retention problem. And so we're going to come back to that key point a little bit later in this presentation. The next takeaway is that entry-level workers are the least satisfied with their careers, especially when it comes to these 3 top components of career satisfaction. So we looked at career satisfaction through a few different lenses. And when it comes to level of pay and job security, entry-level workers are at the bottom of their seniority cohorts. Career advancement opportunities is just slightly higher than the next band, but not by much. So in terms of like the material conditions of working at museums, entry-level workers experience a lot of dissatisfaction with their careers. However, when we look at this bottom component of career satisfaction, when it comes to enjoying the day-to-day work, entry-level workers actually rank higher than most other seniority cohorts. So this is an interesting kind of, we look at these 4 things together and we're like, huh, something's going on here, and it demands a little bit more attention. Takeaway number 3 kind of builds on takeaway number 2, and specifically on career advancement and the sense of career advancement. So a big takeaway from the study overall was that 60% of museum workers are considering leaving their museums, and 67% are considering leaving the field altogether. And when we saw that data, we were like, okay, that's a problem. 2/3 of museum workers currently today are considering leaving the field altogether. Like, what a drain of talent. And then when we zoom into the experience of entry-level workers specifically, we see that one of the highest motivators for leaving their museums for entry-level is a lack of experience opportunities for growth, 67%, which is higher than any other seniority cohort. So that is another kind of like flag for us to be thinking about. Our 4th takeaway is around promotion rates. So as you can see here, the likelihood of having received a full promotion kind of generally increases as you move up the seniority chain. And for entry-level workers, it's a paltry 6%, which can be partially explained by like tenure. Entry-level workers in general have been at their museums less time than other workers, but it doesn't actually fully explain the differences between these seniority bands. There's other things going on that we need to look into. And we also see that in particular, the experience of part-time staff versus full-time staff is really distinct when it comes to promotion. And so a lot of entry-level workers kind of cap out in career advancement stuck in those part-time positions. And then finally, and this is a little bit more of a positive one, is a little bit more hopeful that entry-level workers have an optimistic view of their roles in art museums, more so than other workers, and they experience less burnout. We asked staff to identify their most common emotional states, and entry-level workers painted a much rosier picture for us than other staff at other levels. And so this to us really signals that there's this opportunity to intervene before folks get kind of beleaguered by the sector. And in particular, also flagging that they also don't feel like they have a voice in institutional decision-making, which is one key area where we see entry-level staff especially kind of flagging their disempowerment within the structure of their museums. So we see from all of these 5 takeaways together that entry-level staff is a really key area, not only for diversifying our sector, but also for retaining the future leaders of our field. And given their more positive experiences overall in museums, there are opportunities that we see at MMF and that we see for our partner museums to really build on those experiences. And that's something that we're going to be digging into a little bit later in this presentation. So that is our data study. And we like to say that data helps us prove the problem, which means it gives us numbers to something that we all kind of sense, but maybe don't have the grounded understanding of what it really means. And also, we acknowledge that especially folks who have been in museums for any number of years may feel pretty tired by all the surveys that they get, especially within their own institutions, and sometimes frustrated that they get surveyed every year and nothing really seems to change. So we like to think about the purpose of these field-wide studies as something that's doing something a little different, which is acknowledging that it is not one individual museum or one individual role within a museum that is the problem, but there are really kind of structural issues that we can see across museums, across art museums across the country. And then we can get really clear about how we address those kind of structural issues. And it's important as we do that to be really transparent about the data and our analysis, and to acknowledge that no matter where you are in your journey in museums, even if you haven't made it into a permanent position in a museum, your voice matters, and it directly impacts how we create our programming and how we think about what like the key areas of intervention are. So in that spirit, we're actually going to do a little bit of live data collection right now. And we're going to share a Mentimeter poll in the chat, and then I'm going to pull it up on the screen here, and you can also like take a picture of the QR code, and you'll be able to see the data anonymously as it comes in live. And so we're going to be using this data that will directly inform one of the projects that Martina and Sierra is going to be talking about after this. And similar to the beginning of this presentation, I encourage you to be thinking about as the data comes in, like what's surprising, what's interesting, what does it bring up for you? These are all kinds of like key questions for us as researchers. So I'm going to move over to the Mentimeter where folks are already filling out the first question. We are going to have a few different questions that we're going to walk through. So you can start by answering this first question, and we'll just kind of see the data come in. We're not going to make much commentary on it yet, but rest assured we're going to be collecting it and sharing what we find with all of you after this. Take another minute to fill out this first question. It looks like the majority of folks say no, they weren't informed about internal opportunities for advancement before they accepted their current job. Okay. We'll move on to the next question. Who do you feel most supported by within your museum? And we'll ask you to select just one. This is very interesting. We ask a very similar question in our data study. So it'll be interesting to kind of take this data and compare it to kind of the overall data we've collected across the sector. All right. One more minute. Move on to the next question. Okay, so there are a few different components of this question. So you can kind of take some time to rate how much you agree or disagree with the following statements as it relates to the culture of your current museum workplace. So that goes from strongly disagree over here to strongly agree over here. And I believe you can just like slide the little sliders underneath each question to vote how you feel about each of these components. We'll finish up here. Two more seconds. Okay. So how many total paid and unpaid internships and fellowships did you have before your museum position? And if you're currently an intern or fellow, that is an option as well. Wow, 4 or more. Sierra, that resonates with you, I'm sure. And you too, Martina. Oh my gosh. Okay. So for folks who did take or did have an internship or fellowship, which it seems like it was many of you, what kind of experience in terms of valuable preparation towards a museum career did it have? And you can select all that apply. Okay. And then our final question. And then this kind of zooms out, how valuable overall was your internship or fellowship experience in preparing you for a museum career? Okay. Thank you so much for participating in this study, in this little study. I rest assured that this data is going to be actively used by us and by folks like Martina and Sierra in their work that they're doing. So I'll end the survey now and pass it over to you, Martina and Sierra, to get to the next section.
Thank you so much, Liz. And I'm like kind of in awe of the data we just collected. I know we shouldn't react live. We have to go through and take a look and clean it up a little bit. I want to elevate a comment in the chat where someone said it was kind of hard to advance when you work in a museum with 3 employees. I wonder how small museums skew the data from the first Mentimeter, which is like great point. And there's so many layers to that when we do data collection, right? Like when we have to think about this full scope. Like this was an anonymous, we don't know anything about you all demographics wise. But I'm waiting for Martina to join so we can talk a little bit about our study group. And so on the screen is our Museums Moving Forward study group, which was born out of the town halls that happened when Museums Moving Forward came through various cities after the first report came out. I'm going to hand this over to Martina to kind of go through more. Yeah.
But yes, that was really wild to see the responses as they were coming in, and none of them surprised me. And I wonder if, well, you know, maybe we'll leave that for the Q&A if folks in the room want to offer how they felt about seeing, you know, being part of this, you know, collective experience. But as Liz mentioned, and Sarah was just talking about, me and Sierra, as well as the other people on this Zoom screenshot, are part of a group convened by Museums Moving Forward to discuss career advancement and to think about how career advancement operates from the data that MMF has collected and more broadly from the field. We are a group of 10 museum workers from across the country, and scheduling our conversations involve, you know, kind of a time frame that works across all the zones. And we have all worked at different institutions of different sizes and locations. We have met every other Monday since October 2024, and so we're about 6 months in. And we first began discussing the data that Museums Moving Forward culled from the convenings that took place in spring 2024 in San Francisco, California, Houston, Texas, New York City, and Boston, Massachusetts. And those convenings were to examine the 2023 data study reports and discuss their findings. And I know that text here is tiny, so I'm not expecting you all to read it, but just to give you visuals of what we've been working with. So MMF culled all this information together and provided the group with kind of a summary of the barriers to career advancement in art museums that they saw. And that's a bit bigger on the right-hand screen. On the left, you see how they pull together these texts from all of our conversations. And so even the fact that there were similarities in consensus of experiences from the conversation that they held in looking at the data, in these major metropolitan areas, but that there was, there was so much resonance between them. So next slide. So we started looking, and so we looked at the data and to sort of make some head or tail about it ourselves, because we could build trust with each other by sharing our personal experiences, but to really kind of figure out what our priorities were as a group. We took MMF's method of surveying to heart, and we self-surveyed ourselves. And so we looked at what were the priorities in terms of the barriers to career advancement from the convenings. So next slide is our top 5 barriers that we came up with that we thought were, really key from having self-surveyed ourselves. And the first one coming up for most of us was the power imbalances and feeling of scarcity in museum culture, a deeply embedded top-down management hierarchy and absence of funding and the colonial history, limited pathways for growth, shoehorning staff who want to advance into a management track, the many stated and unstated expectations all intertwined with racism, classism, ableism that determine institutional success, economic pressures brought on by unlivable salaries that make it impossible for those without financial support to be creative and persistent in the face of a broken career advancement system. So those are the challenges, and in discussing them, we tried to flip them to think about, okay, these are the barriers, but what are then the opportunities? How can we turn this around, turn the negative into a positive? And we came up with these 5 opportunities. We need new museum models that have different metrics for success. We need more transparency and creative thinking around career growth. Like, what does it mean? Does it mean to move just vertically or horizontally? Like, what is it about career growth that is about the individual sense of self-fulfillment, self-satisfaction? Reevaluating established systems to disrupt hierarchies between staff, so to sort of try and get out of this pyramidal model and to support each other both between stratas and across stratas. Decoupling pay increases from promotions. So how do you feel rewarded in your career? Is it just monetary? Is it a change of title? Like, how can we think about these ways in an elastic capacity? And bringing an equity framework to compensation and promotion processes. So those are the criteria that we are thinking about working with in terms of creating then a system change. And I'll hand it back to Sierra to go through some of the questions that we've been discussing.
Yes. So very quickly, I want to go through some of the questions that we've had as a study group. One thing in particular we've been thinking about is Is leadership at your organization connected to ongoing conversations in the field? They may not be present at things like Museum Workers Advocacy Day, which typically leans towards entry level and mid career professionals, but are they really aware of what's going on in the field outside of the four walls of your institution, or outside the four walls, or outside the campus, or whatever, wherever your organization is based? Number two, what is your current level of job satisfaction? We realize that this question kind of varies depending on where you are in your position and what time it is, you know. If you ask me my current level of job satisfaction in the peak of internship season, I'm gonna smile weakly at you and then like softly cry in a corner. But I love the work, and if you ask me again in the fall, I'm gonna say I adore it. And the same deal around job satisfaction, thinking about when you start a new job and you love it, you're like, this is great, I'm really happy to be here, it's a great transition. And maybe after a couple of years, you're feeling a little jaded, or you're a little tired of the role and thinking about your next steps. Those questions will garner different responses depending on what time that you're getting them. Three, have you considered leaving the field due to lack of growth opportunities? We've been really talking about that, and that's something that we've seen come up in the initial pilot study for MMF. So, is this something that's still consistently happening? Is this something that we can hear more from people about, and what those questions are really, and what questions and even thoughts that they're having around why leaving the field? What are they thinking about leaving for? We're also having questions around, have you ever been promoted by your organization? I think that there's a prevalent conversation. I'm going to shout out the Emerging Museum Professionals Facebook group. And I know there is also a Discord as well as the Museum Pros Reddit, where there are constantly forums of people just talking about, you know, promotions, having to leave their job to get a new job, or recommending to people that they may have to move somewhere else to get that step up that they're looking for to get to that next position. And if that's something that's prevalent across our field, what does actual promotion look like at our organizations, like actually? And then our last question is, does your current organization have a written promotion policy and or publicly support professional growth for current staff members? So the call could be actually coming from inside the house. If you have a constant rotating door of people coming in and out of the institution, is there actual policy or procedures in place for folks to grow and expand their work? Is there actual public support of people going to conferences, going to sessions and community events, going to workshops? Is there encouragement to join professional groups and go to their conferences or annual meetings? How is your organization supporting that growth for current staff members? And which staff members? Is this only accessible to full-time staff? Is this only accessible to certain levels of staff? Is this only accessible to folks who have been here for a certain number of years? Those kinds of things need to be very clearly outlined, and we're looking to get more information on those as well. I'm going to hand it back to Martina to kind of take us through, I think, our very last bit that we've been talking about as well.
I think it's Liz, actually. But thanks, Sierra.
Yeah, and I'm just looking at the time too, and I want to make sure that we have some space for a Q&A. So I might like wrap up our presentation here, but also note that like one part that we didn't get to, but I'm happy to talk more about, and Martina as well, if there are questions, is around how data is used in museum unionization drives. Because I think that also follows, I just want to like uplift what Martina and Sierra have been talking about, because what they've been doing through this study group is really like following the timeline, like the flow of how data kind of transmutes from just like numbers on a screen into like being really embedded in not only your like personal narratives, but also your you know, your relationships with each other and how it connects you, how you're able to build on it, and then how it can feel like maybe there's like a way to take all of that mostly depressing data and turn it into something that can actually be, you know, find the points of leverage that you as staff members have, and you have more of it together than you have on your own. So I just want to maybe end our slideshow here and just open up for any questions that anybody has. And yeah, if we can go from there.